Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session, recording number 149. My name is Dani Beaumont and I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Adobe Muse team. I'm joined today by Laurel D'Angelo, and in this session we're going to talk about all that is new with Adobe Muse as of the release we pushed out a week ago today, so last Thursday. We'll take a tour of those changes. I have gone ahead and put together a few resources for this session. You'll notice on the right-hand side there, or the left-hand side, there's a resources tab that has our release notes, some fresh videos and tutorials, and also on the product page there's some new help and support content as well. So let's go ahead. I'm not sharing yet, Valerie, I promise, but I'm referring to the resources on the left. I'm going to also start to record these sessions so that you can play them back on YouTube. But what that means, Laurel D'Angelo, is that people cannot click on chat to jump to different parts of the session. So we may want to think that through differently. If you're watching the recording on YouTube, you're just going to watch. And if you're watching it over Connect, you can scrub around in the recording. With that said, I will begin sharing my screen. I am also really close to an espresso machine today, so we'll see how the sound goes for you. Okie doke. Here I am in Adobe Muse, and I have a version of the Ike's Bikes demo asset. This is something new we've been working on of late, open on my desktop here. Now, when I first opened it up, let me go ahead and show you the behavior when you first open up a file that is older than something that you create brand new with this latest release that we just pushed out. So I'm going to open up, let's see, Ike's Bikes variation here. And what you'll notice is that I get a message that says that it's converting the file. And when I come into Site Plan here, the thumbnails are coming up, but they're kind of grayed out. And that's because we're going through a process to convert the content and optimize that content to this latest build that we're just delivering, the 2014.3. You may notice it's 2015, but we're using the 2014 naming. That is by design. It's an Adobe thing. We will remain 2014 for a little while longer, but the .3 version is the latest version available to you. As I mentioned, it's converting the file here. So one of the things that's happening is it's looking into that file and it's optimizing the content. I have kind of a running list here of all of the new features. So the first one we're talking about is file optimization. So only the first time you open up an older file does it run through that conversion. Once the conversion is done, you should find that the file behaves more quickly, that working within the application is quicker. This is predominantly a performance update for our user base. What we found is that more and more often people have dozens of pages, if not more than that, and lots of complex content. So we put a lot of focus in this release on looking at the underlying performance of the app and how pages actually perform in the browser as well. So there was that conversion process. If you have a few or many widgets, you'll notice that that first time there's a process that is gone through where those widgets are converted. That is a one-time only conversion. What we're doing is copying the older widgets into a new directory and optimizing them as well. If for any reason you did need to roll back to an older version of Muse, those older instances of the widgets will still be there. But this allows us to, again, have a performance improvement as you work with library items and widgets on the canvas. So also within the application, you'll see performance improvements. I'll close this second instance out because I really only need one. And I'll come on out to the site plan here. If I double click on a rather large page, we've always allowed you to zoom in and out of pages, but we added a couple more shortcuts here. I can double click on the zoom tool to bring my page to actual size. If I double click on the hand tool, that's the same as scale to fit, basically. So it's going to scale the page to fit on screen. Double clicking will make it full screen. Other kind of common keyboard commands that we brought over into Muse. There's a saying, standards, I love them, there's so many to choose from. So people say, why don't you make it like the other Adobe apps? Sometimes there's a question about which standard we should adhere to. Some of our apps came from Macromedia, some came from Adobe, some came from Aldus, you name it. So as we standardize on our standard, we are moving more of the keyboard commands whenever we get a chance towards either InDesign when that's appropriate or Photoshop depending on the feature. But another enhancement we have is I can hold the Option key on the Macintosh, and as I zoom, it's going to zoom to where the magnifying glass is, so it kind of controls that zoom. That's something that you've had in other Adobe apps that we were asked to bring over. So that's there as well. Another thing you'll notice when you just look at the page, I kind of, in some ways I tend to forget if I'm in the browser or in Adobe Muse. And that's because we've again iterated on the default view of the app to make it a little more elegant and have a little bit more robust features around viewing content. So if I hit Command semicolon or pull down on View to hide and show guides, I can see the guides that I have here. So I have a grid system set up and I'm seeing those guides. I can press and drag guides on the canvas to individual locations if I'd like. And those guides are there and I can hide and show them. Another thing we've done, if you're familiar with Muse, is we're no longer by default showing the edges of the content. So if I hide up those guides, notice that I have, let's see if I take my text tool here and press and drag a container and then go ahead and let's see, hit escape and click off of that object. The container, that empty container, now does not have a default stroke. So we did that again just to kind of simplify the user experience, make it a little bit more elegant. But in turn, it makes it a little easier to drop things like text boxes or trigger target components if they don't have a default stroke, to drop them into place and not be able to find them very easily. I could always come in and say select all and see all of those components, but it can be a little tricky. So we've added another feature under View. You can hide and show edges, show frame edges here. I use the keyboard command, so Control Command H on the Macintosh to hide and show those edges. So now if I do come in and create a text box accidentally while I'm pressing and dragging, I'll be able to see that on the canvas without having to select all the objects. Another thing that we did a couple releases ago, we used to draw a difference in color. If I come in and just say File New for a moment here and look at a page, you'll notice that the default state of the page now is just almost like a blank piece of paper. If I hit Command semicolon, I can see my guides, both page and background guides. I've got header and footer guides here, but we used to fill the background with a shade of gray and the page with a fill color. We're no longer doing that just because most websites really have that immersive experience where they take up the entire browser. Kind of the idea of a web page with a different browser background is out of style. So for newer users, we're kind of leading with that default behavior. You're still free to come in and, let's say, change your page fill and come up with a browser fill color that would be different. So you can set those attributes by all means by default. But we're not stroking and filling those right out of the box. Another really, let's go ahead and get out of here. And let me go back to my master list so that I don't jump around too much. So we spoke about file optimization. There's a nice feature here if you happen to be a photographer. When we import JPEG files, we're now preserving more metadata. That was a request from folks that wanted to work with Muse and Photoshop together or Lightroom together. We talked about performance in the app and the zooming features. That performance also translates over to pages when you generate them and publish them up to the web. So each cycle, when the Muse team has an opportunity to improve the app, they really focus on a couple of things. Many of you have heard me say it, but the beauty of Muse is that you design on the canvas. That is your job, to design something and to preview it in the browser of your choice. The Muse team has the responsibility to work as hard as they can to make sure that what you're seeing in that browser is consistent across platforms and devices and browsers. So still not so much your responsibility. And in doing that, web standards, open standards, it's not like business as usual for Adobe where we own the PostScript print language and can update that API or that language to embrace new features and applications like InDesign. When it comes to the web, we can do all we want in Muse, but we're only as good as the standards like CSS and HTML standards that are being adhered to by browsers, and kind of the lowest common denominator of those browsers. Having said that, the team constantly is trying to increase performance and optimize the content that we do deliver on the web. So we've done a few of those iterations this time. If you use CSS to render bevels and inner glows, instead of rasterizing that, we'll keep it as CSS. So if I went on with this kind of unattractive example here, let's say I have a text container and I decided to round the corners and give it a stroke. It used to be that just the minute I had rounded corners, the world would get complicated on the web. Let's see if I round that up a little bit more. Something like this. So just rounded corners used to require that it would be flattened out as a JPEG file, let's say. Muse hasn't required that pretty much since Muse shipped. But other things like when I came in and applied a shadow or an inner glow or a bevel, in some instances it would flatten that out. What we're saying now is that you can apply any of these effects. So inline glow and bevel, even when they're applied in a somewhat tragic manner, I won't attempt to do anything attractive here, but they'll remain CSS. So they're lighter and quicker to load in the browser. They're code and not flattened images. In addition to that, we're also looking at the SVG content that we're rendering, and we've optimized the loading of SGV content in browsers, so the code that we're rendering there will load more quickly in the browsers. And we're also looking at the compression that we've applied to PNG files. So as usual, we always encourage you when there's a new release and you have sites that are out there, go ahead and open up Muse, open up the older site that you have live already, push it up as a trial. So go ahead and just do a little smoke test and republish that site to a trial. Make sure everything does look the way you would expect it to. And once you've checked that, go ahead and republish your design using the latest version of Muse. I think you'll see that the sites will load more quickly, if nothing else, based on that optimization. Other things that we've done, if you work on a high DPI Windows device, there were 4K monitors that started shipping in the last months, and Muse, the application was very painfully small on those higher resolution devices. And we're now optimizing the way Muse works in those operating systems, so you now have the appropriate resolution comparable to a Retina display on a Macintosh. You'll have higher resolution, but it doesn't mean that the application just gets smaller. So we've changed that for the Windows side of the house. And then that takes us into some site plan improvements. I'm going to jump over to chat, make sure that the world is all good. Valerie should see me sharing now. Phil is raising his hand, but I'm not sure why. Okay, I'm going to keep going. We'll jump out of this and go into that nicer design. And let's go ahead and jump over into the site plan. So site plan is one of 4 different workspaces that we have here. And we've had lots of features here in the site plan for some time. You've had the ability to apply a master. Let's say I have a blog here and I've applied no master to that blog. If I wanted to apply the master, I've always been able to press and drag to apply that new master onto that design. But now, just kind of a bit of a speed saver here, if I press and drag the master into any new slot here, it's going to create a new page and it will apply the master that I've just selected to that page. If, for example, I had a stack of content here, if I had collapsed this group with all of the child pages, I can press and drag a new page. Muse is going to go on in and add an additional page there. Let's see if this wants to behave for me. So it's going to add the page in that stacking order there and go ahead and open up the group so that I can see that as well. Another feature that we've had for a while has been the ability to be working on pages on your site but suppress them from being output, either previewed or rendered, uploaded to your live site, your live hosting platform. So let's say I'm working on Untitled 8 and 9 here. I've always been able to come on in and uncheck export page, which would basically make sure that that page is not exported. What we found though is people do that, and then they continue working on the design, and over time they forget that they turned it off, that they deselected export page, and they can't figure out why it is that the page is not showing up. So we're adding a better visual cue here. It's just a grayed out instance with this little page turn indicator that lets you know that that page is there. It's in your design locally, but it's not going to be uploaded until you go on in there and recheck the export page so that it would enable the upload of that content. All right, back to the cheat sheet. Let's see. Clear all states and styles. This is probably one of my very favorite features in Muse. And you'll see why in just a second. So if I were working on this lovely page and I decided I wanted to start with a widget that I want to add to the design. So I'm going to come on into the widget library, and I've got a bunch of categories for widgets here. And back in the day, this is kind of 1.0 for Muse. We did have a number of different types of widgets. And if you've hung around the land of widgets long enough here, you've probably realized that in any one of these categories, they're all based on the same type of widget. So under slideshow, for example, I can create a basic slideshow or a full-on lightbox slideshow. They're just changes in the config, in the widget attributes basically, rather than different source widgets. So I could start with a basic slideshow and configure it to be full screen. When I work with the items though, we did put some effort in to make sure that folks understood how widgets work. If we just kind of gave you the real raw element, it would be hard to understand. So for example, when I press and drag a tabbed panel onto the canvas, I get some default attributes. There's the configurable attributes here, but then I've got kind of an example of how a tab panel would work. So I can click between each of the tabs, and you'll notice that each tab has a different image and different text in it. Well, that's great when you're trying to learn how widgets work. But once you got that down, it can be really time consuming to remove all of the default styling and apply your own. So if you're familiar with Muse, you probably are familiar with the idea that every object within Muse can have up to 4 states associated with that object. So if I click on just the tab here of the tabbed panel, you'll notice that I'm in the active state for that tab. If I click down and go to the rollover state, you can see it's slightly different. There's the normal state, rollover, mouse down state, and then the active state. Kind of little subtle changes. I've just got a stroke there that goes away in the active state, for example. Now, each object in this widget, if I come to the container down here, it'll also have its own 4 sets of states. Menus are a perfect example of those states and how each menu item does have up, over, down, and active states. And as you're working, it can be kind of a pain to remember to go on in and delete all of those states. So what we've done is allowed you to now come into any widget. This can be one that you fully designed and want to reuse, or one that you're pulling out of the widget library as I just did. I can come to that object, and with it selected, it kind of depends on my selection state. So notice I'm in a content area state here. If I hit escape, I'm now selecting the entire tabbed panel. I can right mouse on this object and select either clear all styling or clear widget contents. If I clear out all styling, what happens is it's going on in there and it's clearing out the styling applied to that object. So it's reverting to a default state for the fonts, the colors, background fills and such. If I come to this tabbed panel now, you'll notice that there are no fills or graphic styles or swatches applied to it. It's cleared it all out. So it's just much easier now for me to come in and intentionally apply the styles that I want. The other thing we offer is, as I mentioned, you notice I have a plus here. I can add more tabs really easily and click between those tabs. So here I am in those original instances, but I've got a lot of stuff here that I'd have to go on in and delete. If I want to remove the content now on that widget, I select the widget, and I'll go on in and select, instead of clear all styling, clearing widget contents. Phil, I'm not sure why you're raising your hand. I will approve you to raise your hand, but if you have a question, you probably want to throw it into the chat rather than raise your hand. It's the best way to let Laurel know what you're looking for. So I'm going to keep going. So what I did there is I cleared all content. it cleared out all of the tabs and all of the content in that tab. Well, what I can do now is come on in here and say, well, that's great. Let me go on in and select the font of my choice, the size of my choice and such. I may even come on in and say, you know what, I do want a background fill of the shade of green, and I may even come in and decide that I want to add some spacing to the object. So if I come into the spacing panel, I might add on the left-hand side a little bit of an inset. Now the nice part, if you're organized about the way you're working, is by default widgets also come on in, and you'll notice here that, losing my train of thought here for a second. If I come, oh yeah, I know. If I come into the widget, notice that it says by default, let's go up to the root level. If I escape on up to this object, so I've got my tabbed panel, I can come into this label here, and depending on the widget, I think it doesn't apply to this one, there's this idea of edit together, and that says that any changes you make to one sibling item will apply to all of them. I know that as I'm working on this tabbed panel, if I actually thought this was an attractive looking tab, which you're going to be kind about, when I hit the plus button, what you'll notice is that it's within the size of this object, it's adding those additional tabs. I could stretch this out. Keep hitting plus. It's going to inherit any styling that I might have applied to the object along with graphic styles, paragraph styles. So it allows you to go on in, strip away any of the defaults, define exactly what you want, and in many instances when you duplicate, it will inherit and repeat that styling. Okay, kind of a good combination there. So a big time saver, if you ask me. I'm going to move on over now to the landing page, and let's go back to our list so that I don't miss anybody here. We talked about hide and show edges. Let's talk a little bit about finding instances throughout the site. So if you're like me, you start out with all the best of intentions with a new site, and then invariably when you're in maintenance mode for that site, you get in, you get out, a lot of times during the week perhaps, or during the month, and you don't always have time to perform perfect housekeeping. And what can happen is over time, things get a little bit messier. So for this site, this is a pretty new site, but in it I have a series of paragraph styles that I've defined for my content. And as I'm working, notice if I come on down here, let's go ahead and hide edges a little bit and hide guide so that I can see just my artwork. I can tell if I click into this text content that I've got, you know, body copy reversed defined here for my text in this instance. Now as I'm working, I may have accidentally created a new paragraph style, I may have duplicated it, I may be using multiple styles and I really want to unify my site. What I can do is come on into the instance of a style by coming to the paragraph styles panel here. If I right mouse on it, notice that I now have something called go to style use. And this will show me all instances throughout the site where I'm using this particular paragraph style. Now I also have the power to come on in and just delete a style. When I click on delete, I can go in and change it. I can say, make sure that all of the body copy reversed is deleted, and instead it inherits something like body copy. Maybe that's just fine across the site. So it allows me to first see all the instances by revealing them, and then I can easily delete and replace with another style I might have defined. This also manifests itself with other elements in the site. So let me go on into the landing page a little bit here. I've got like this bike image here, and for design reasons, instead of just placing the bike has been filled as a background image in a container. And the reason for that is if you look at this site live, let's just go ahead and jump to the live instance of the site. So be kind, I'm still working on the design. It's not quite finished yet, but Ike's bikeshopsf.com. I have a slight variation here, but notice how the bike is kind of moving off screen. So in order to get that effect, I needed to define it as a background image that had scale to fill defined with a scroll effect. Now, when I do that, it has to be a background image. As I'm designing, though, I may not be sure, do I want to place the image or do I want to find it as a background image? I can now come to a container. You'll notice this container has a background fill, and that's indicated there. I can right mouse on it and I can cut the background image. I can just copy the background image. I could then come in and just select Edit Paste, and it's going to paste that image not as a background, but as a proper image. It's just a placed image now. So I could play with those two variations. Another really nice thing is if I come into the Layers panel, and I do have background images defined. So if I look at my desktop instance here, and I've got some images working here. Let's just see. So I've got like the gear image that's working in this instance. So funny, this looks a little different to me. I'm going to expand this guy out. It's because I want to be in the Assets panel, having a memory moment there. So I have a series of assets that I'm working with. I've got this bicycle that's defined as a background. Now, traditionally, if you wanted to see what the heck that background image was, you'd be kind of stuck. What I got really good at was zooming really tight in to say, oh, it's the bicycle. But I couldn't find the occurrence of a background image because of some aspect of the way browsers and Muse was defined. Background images, I just couldn't see what they were. I could come in, for example, and see logo badge white each instance. So you'll notice that when I place this logo, there's multiple instances on the master pages, and I can see them when I dial down. And I can actually go in and say, go to asset, and it would take me to that asset on that particular page. But we haven't had that benefit for items that were defined as background images. I can do that now. If I come to Masthead Background 2 here, I can right mouse and select Go to Asset Use. Similar to what I showed you for paragraph styles and graphic styles, we now have for background images. So I can jump on over and see where that occurs on the current page or on any other page within the site. And then that copy paste feature is just kind of there across the board. So being able to copy the background image, paste it as a background image, or just simply paste, and then cut the background image is just a really nice productivity feature. All right, switching back to chat, seeing how the world is going. Hello, Dana Cooper. Glad you're here. I think we're good, but you guys can shout out in the question area if there's anything I'm forgetting. So what was the key escape? Yes, when you are working in hierarchical nested objects, so if I have, let's just see, I'll go to my menu here because widgets are the perfect example of nested objects and how complex they can be. Notice that I've got nothing selected on the canvas and it says I'm at a page mode. If I click the first time, I've now selected the menu. If I click a second time, I've selected the menu item known as products here. I could change the background fill of products, for example, or type T on the keyboard to actually edit the text. Although this is a dynamic menu, it's dynamically generated, it wouldn't let me edit it. Now, if I've gone too far, if I really wanted to be at the container level, I hit escape on the keyboard, which takes me up a level. If I hit escape again, it's going to take me up one more level to where I'm at the menu mode, at the highest level of that widget. So when in doubt, just keep clicking. And if you've gone too far, hit escape to back out. That's kind of the trick there. Chris Kellett needs to find his phone. If anybody sees it lying around, give him a call to let him know. So someone please ask Dani to move the chat box up on the screen. I can do that, but we're going to lose out on other stuff if I do it, because then we lose our questions. You can scroll the chat box, but you're finding it painful to have it lower. I will do a quick shuffle because I live to serve. We'll put the questions down. The reason why this is slightly changed is if you're watching this recording on YouTube, you cannot necessarily hide all this stuff when you want it. Okay, hopefully you feel better with that. Chat is to the top. I'm going to keep going. Let's take a look at my list. All right, we talked about the Assets panel and the ability to find instances and show use of styles. That's all been discussed. Other little niceties as you're working. I don't know if you noticed this. I did not. It took an engineer to spell it out to me. But as I'm working, depending on how geeky you are, sometimes folks want to be able to upload additional files that are in a known location that they can reference for various purposes. It could be, let me kind of point this out, if you use in-browser editing and your client needs to have a few images that perhaps are not on the site right now, but by way of in-browser editing, you want them to be able to choose alternate images for certain parts of their site. This is a great way to achieve that feature. What you're able to do is pretty much with nothing selected on the canvas here, I'm going to go ahead and open up my assets panel, and I'm going to go ahead and sort by type here for a second. And we can see in the assets panel, if I tear this off, I've got background images. If I scroll on down, that's pretty much all I have is some placed images and background images. Let's say I know that I want to have some downloadable files, like say a PDF menu that I want to work with in my design. I can pull down on File here to add files for upload. And I can go on in there and grab the Katie's Cafe Building PDF, which has nothing to do with what we're doing here. Let's see if I can grab Ike's for a second. I think I've got a PDF there. So in that assets folder, let me just see. Let's go back to Katie because it doesn't really matter. It makes life simple. Okay, so doesn't really matter. I've got a cute little PDF release of liability file that I'd like to work with here. What I've done is pulled in on File to add files for upload, and I've clicked Open. So I now have an asset here, a PDF file, that when I publish the site, it's going to go into the assets folder, so /assets, whatever my URL is. That file will be there. I can go on in and do that again if I pull down on File to add files for upload, or I could actually take a different approach if I wanted. I can come on in and say, grab the file here, and I could click on here, and in my hyperlinks area, I can select files. I see that I've got one file that I uploaded just by the file menu. I can also link to any other file that I might have. And here's an emergency form. It's always good to have. So I'm going to click Open. And now that PDF file is actually linked to the word here. So because it is linked there, I know that when anyone clicks that on the website, they'll download the PDF file. And if you look in the directory here, if the demo gods want to be kind to me, let's go ahead and sort again by section here. I've got that US rowing waiver. Should see two of those guys. So here's my emergency form, and I have that US rowing waiver. Let's do a little bit more just so that we can show this off in a little bit more exaggerated way. I'm going to select a couple PDF files, and I'm just going to add those. Let's stick with PDF just to make it simple here. Storage and masters. So I now have a few files that are going to be uploaded. I've got storage contract, I've got master contract, but if you remember, there's only one of those files is actually linked here. So although I have 3 files for upload, only one of them is linked to a particular file. So it's getting kind of messy, kind of making a mess on purpose here. So as you're working, if you're afraid you're uploading a bunch of files that are no longer linked to anything actively within the site, you can just come into the Assets panel, kind of click on one instance of an upload file, and when you right mouse, you'll see the Delete Unused Files for Upload. If I do that, I should basically only have one file to be uploaded now, which is the one that is linked to something. Hope that makes sense. You've always been able to kind of generally click in here and remove any unused assets in that same way, where if you happen to have linked to an asset and then you no longer place it on the page, you can clean up the Assets panel by removing any unused assets as a whole, in addition to files that are going to be uploaded. Okay, kind of following suit with that, if you've gone in and defined a layer that you're no longer really using, that's not in active use, so if I come into layers here and I decide I really want one called nothing, and indeed there is nothing on the nothing layer, when I come on in and say delete unused layers, it's going to delete any layer that doesn't have content somewhere on the site. So just another housekeeping bit there. Another is find and replace for keyboards. So we added that feature. It's pretty powerful actually as you're working to be able to find and replace content. So if I pull down under Edit, I can select Find and Replace, or hit Command or Control F to bring up that dialog. Once I'm there though, as a power user here, I can use keyboard commands to find Next, Previous, Unused Selection for Find, and Use Selection for Find. So use Selection for Find or use it for Replace, sorry. So that you don't even have to copy and paste. You just highlight something and make that the Find or Replace text. So I now can do that if I'm a power user with keyboard commands. We just delivered Find and Replace, I believe, a release ago, so we circled back and added those keyboard commands once we had a chance to do it. I'm going to check on chat. Chris is still looking for his phone, always good to know. So what happens with widgets when we have on our computer but not installed yet? When we install them, will they update on their own? The answer is no. If you have downloaded widgets, let's say you paid for them from one of our widget providers or they're free, when there are updates, you do need to, there's not a mechanism right now that alerts you that there's a newer version of that widget available. We want to do that. I think it would be great, good housekeeping, but we don't have that feature right now. So instead, the widget providers like Chris Kellett, Ali Pordelli, Steve Harris, and on, folks that are developing widgets for us, they'll usually email the base and let you know that there are a new version of the widget available and encourage you to go download and use that. So you kind of have to pull it rather than it get pushed to your desktop, but it's a nice request for a feature for sure. Looking at questions. Gotcha. I understand why chat was bad for you before. My apologies. Okay. Looks like font discussions are going on. I will let Chris handle that. Let's keep going through our master list a little bit. Text selection improvements, incredibly subtle. Laurel and I both had to have the engineer spell it out for me because I didn't get it at first. But if you're a power user, you'll like it. I find that the text cursor actually has changed a little bit in a good way, I believe. I can't guarantee that it just happened with this current release. It may have been earlier, but notice how as I'm working, I've got a pointer selected. If I roll over text content and click on that text content, that's kind of interesting. Nothing happens, right? So I've got my little cursor here. I can go click on an object. If instead I go to the text container here, I've got a text tool, and notice that it's indicating pretty much that if I were to press and drag in that location, it's going to create a new text container that I can type into. If I were to hit escape and deselect that text object, the text frame is there. I now have a pointer, but if I go back to my text pointer, which a nice shortcut to that is if you type T on the keyboard, it turns it into a text container or text tool for a moment. Notice how I've got the ability to create a container until I roll over something that has text. And then I just click once and can edit the text. So again, with my T on the keyboard selected, I can come in and enter text here, and the minute I roll off, it changes to a container where I can just create containers by pressing and dragging, or roll over an object and just select the text, for example, without even having to click. When that icon changes, it just gives you finer control. Let's go into some text that's a little easier for you to see what I'm doing here too. I'm going to come on over here. So notice with the text that I've got in this area, let's see what I was going to show next. It has to do with selection. So used to be if I came into this text box and I clicked 1, 2, it would allow me to click into that container. So I was in a pointer there. I clicked twice and it allowed me to come in and edit. If I click again now, 1, 2, it selects just that text. If instead I kind of click off here for a second and I press, let's say I start in the middle of the word want there and I drag, I can select a letter at a time. The new enhancement is if you double click 1, 2, but instead of releasing on the 2, you start to drag. How's that for disco? So if I go 1, 2, and start dragging, I can't really select mid-word now. It's selecting the whole word at a time. So this is a feature. It's a requested feature. It's something people of the land of InDesign, I think, like very much. So to be clear, I can press and drag to get partial content, but if I double click 1, 2 and hold as I drag, it's going to select word at a time. Don't go crazy. I know the applause is overwhelming, and if I could hear it, it would be really noisy, but just try to stay calm. I know. That's that one. Superscript, subscript, upper and lowercase. So as I'm working here, we want to pair you with the perfect bike and accessories to match your lifestyle. So let's say I change some text here, and cycling is your first love. So since cycling is your first love, that looks really odd because I've got the word ST and the number 1, and ST is so large. So being a good typographer, what I want to do is come on in to select the word ST, and in my text panel now, you'll notice I have greater typographic control. I can come in and create superscript or subscript. So I might change that to first as in superscript, so to speak. Let's come in a little bit tighter. So I made that small. You may also do footnotes, and you can define footnotes as such, where I may say that unique needs to be a footnote there. I'd make it very small, and I could create such a footnote. Other things that I can do as I'm working is if I come along here, and let's zoom on out a little bit, go down to this area. So I might want to add more emphasis to this and say call us to make an appointment, and I block that out there. I ideally do not want to have to retype my text, but I want to get a little more emphasis. What I can do now is come in and select a block of text. I can set it all to lowercase. I can set it to all uppercase capitalization. Go on in and give that a bold stroke perhaps. Anything I've done though, I can toggle back off again. So I can convert very easily to all uppercase, all lowercase, or toggle back to that mixed case state with the new typographic controls, in addition to superscript and subscript. Okie doke. Moving right along. This one's a little funny. You either know about it or you don't, and if you do, you'll know what to do. I took a screen cap here from my engineer that did the work. He's not my engineer. He's Adobe Muse's engineer, but he's amazing. His name is Abhishek. But what he explained is that having to do with the way browsers work, given certain designs, in the design canvas, it was really difficult to align text to a particular container without it shifting in the browser. So what we've done is if you went through that process, let's say you had service and repairs on the same line here with text below it, and you were seeing a misalignment to the lower text in comparison to these larger numbers, you may have adjusted for it by looking in the browser, you saw it was wrong, and you adjust the spacing. If you open up an older file that you've gone in and done that work, under preferences here, you'll notice that we have, actually it's probably site properties. I have an advanced tab, and I have this use legacy text baseline positions. That means that if you tried to fiddle to get those guys to line up manually so that they looked good in the browser, you can check this box and it will make sure that it retains those changes. Going forward though, with that box unchecked, we're going to do pretty much the right thing around making sure that that alignment is consistent with what you see in the desktop design and what you see in the browser. So in design mode in Muse, what you see there will be what renders in the browser if that's unchecked and you have a new file. That checkbox is there for legacy files where you don't really want to bother going in and making the change again. You'll just retain any work you've done before we put in that fix. Okie doke. FTP Auto Detect. This one's pretty sweet. If I come in here and I'm ready to publish my site, so this lovely mess of a site that I've now made, if I wanted to FTP it up, I can pull down. Now, as you know, there's a number of ways to publish within Muse. I've got a drop down here that allows me to go to either an FTP host, to push it to Business Catalyst as a temporary site or something that I might upgrade with my entitlements, or to export just to a folder because I want to use my own tool. When I have FTP host enabled here, or if I just pull down on File to FTP, I now have kind of some help. So I personally have probably 40 domains with GoDaddy. I probably have 5 hosted sites with GoDaddy. And until this feature, I have never, ever been able to publish to GoDaddy without calling somebody in their support center to try to figure out the FTP attributes that they need for that particular site to upload the content, because it's very complicated and hosting platforms can be complex. What I have now is an auto detect feature. I'm going to come on in, and I don't really want to wreck this, so let's see if I can get away with it. If I go FTP, Ike's Bike Shop, sf.com. Under my username, it's going to be Ike at Ike's Bike Shop.com. I will probably get this wrong, but I could store the credentials if I want to keep them. I have this nice feature here. Notice method FTP by default. But under the options, when I click on this, I can go to Auto Detect. And notice what happened. It kind of happened very quickly there. But Muse is doing a quick query to see which of these are viable options for me. So just looking in here, I can see what in a quick query, the FTP tool has had a conversation with the hosting platform and seen as a possibility. If I really have no idea, I can just say auto detect. Muse is going to then go through and test each of the connection options and find out which one it thinks is the best way to connect, whether it's secure FTP or general FTP. These checkboxes also let me know those possibilities. So just a real ease of use improvement for FTP uploading, allowing you to know a little bit more about what's going on in that back-end server and what your choices are as you work there. All right, moving right along. We're down to about 10 minutes-ish, and I do want to take some questions. I want to show you just a couple more features. So many of us are consumers of widgets, but there are a few good dozen folks at least that are creating some wonderful widgets for Muse that are using the MooCow or configurable widget format. And we've offered a few improvements to those folks. If you make widgets of your own, you'll want to take advantage of this. If you don't, you'll just want to enjoy it. And this is a distinct reason why you'll want to check in with the folks that sell the widgets you may have bought in the past, because they likely have updated their widget to improve the user experience in the way I'm going to show you right now. All right, I want to add a widget. This one is from Ali Pordelli, the cookie folks. And I'm going to go to my library, of course. And in my library, I have something called the image wrapper. And I'd like to drop that onto the page here. Now, I've got kind of a silly example of how I would use this because I lost my original images. But that's okay. What you'll notice is in this widget, instead of the old way that you would deal with images, which was to pull down on File, to add or remove, add files for upload. You had to upload it, and it would go into the assets folder. You'd have to figure out what the name was, and then in the widget, you'd have to come on in and type the exact name of that image and not get it wrong, or else it would break. The site wouldn't work. We now allow folks that make these widgets to have 2 new features, a color picker and an image picker. So I could come in here, let's say write image. I'm going to go grab an image I want to work with. And I've got, let's see, my assets folder. I've got kind of a black version of a wrench that I'm going to drop in here. So I just go in and select it, and notice I've got wrench black in the right image. For the left image, I'm going to grab wrench yellow. It's kind of a before and after version of the same wrench. And I also want to pick up on a divider stroke here. There's actually a colored line that I want to accentuate. Notice I can click now and I get the swatches panel here. I actually have a name swatch called Ike's Yellow that I want to select there. And then I'm going to set the weight of that line. And just to kind of show how this widget works, I'll press and drag it a little larger. And then when I come on in and preview the page in the browser, what Muse is doing now is knowing where that image is, because it's a nice little picker. It's going to upload that image along with the rest of the page. There's no heavy lifting that you have to do. Just know where that image is and upload it as part of your site simply by linking it in that widget panel. So now when I come on in here, I've got this little image slider. I can kind of slide between the two versions of that image. But it was just very easy for me to do. I also picked up on the colors of the site. So again, check with your widget provider. See if there are updates that you might want to take advantage of and download with that improvement. If you've not stepped into the wonderful world of widgets, I really encourage you to do so. Notice right now I've got image wrapper selected and it's here in the library view. If I can find a swell way to click off of that view, let's see if I can do this. It's kind of tricky. Let's try to go to the layer panel, come back to library. Notice that with library open and nothing selected, I have up in the top a find more library items online. If you click that, it takes you to a page on the Adobe Muse microsite called Widgets. And this is a great space to see free widgets, paid widgets, any new widgets we've added. Laurel D and I are getting ready to promote widgets a little bit more in the next few weeks. We've got a nice area here where we can feature some of the best widgets or any promotions that might be going on with those widgets. So I encourage you to go on in and check those out. If you are a creator of widgets, you're going to want to go to GitHub and you're going to search for Adobe Muse, and some of the documentation there is going to speak about these new capabilities for creating widgets that have the color picker and the image picker as part of it. All right, as I always love to say, you've wasted pretty much another perfectly good hour with the Adobe Muse team, hopefully learning a trick or two. So I'm going to jump over to our closing space. I need polling results here. I need to know if this covered what you wanted to hear. There was a question about responsive design. I still see over there. We never talk about futures until the future is here. So it is not something that we could talk about. We know that folks are looking for it. Folks like Ali Pordelli and Cookie are working pretty hard to make widgets that allow you to have some pretty darn good responsive behavior. But we do want to build it more natively into the application. Nothing to talk about around that right now, other than it's something that's interesting to us. If you are interested in giving your voice to work that you do, please come and join our private pre-release. So I'm going to give you the URL here. It's museprerelease.com. If you put that into the browser, give it a go, agree to our non-disclosure agreement, and then give us some feedback about features like responsive that you'd like to see. Help us prioritize it. We're not made of millions of engineers. We just have pretty much a stellar handful of both testing engineers and development engineers, but we do value your feedback. So that is it for now. If there are jam session topics you'd love to talk about, I don't think that the jam session talk of Dani is relevant, but I'll usually be there. If that's what you want to come see, I will be there. But let us know topics that you'd like to cover. Thank you everyone for your time, and we will see you next week this time. If you want to grab the recording link, hang on just 1 second and I will give you that. I'll be back.